this video, I'm going to show you how you can make a possession effect like that. Imagine you have a girl lying in bed and suddenly she's getting possessed and she starts floating. It's a very common effect in movies, and now we're going to do it ourselves with the help of Blender, GreenScreen, and Davinci. In order to make an effect like that, we obviously need to shoot our footage. And throughout this effect, I'm also going to break a few rules, super important rules, but if you're working on a budget like I do, I basically did this effect for $0, then you have to make certain compromises. Like, let's look at our footage here. We see that Allie is actually lying down on 2 stools. So I wrapped the green screen around her. Like, obviously it's behind her and she's on top of the green screen. And I did that so I could simulate that she's actually floating and she can be having her limbs hanging down as if she was floating. Obviously, it would have been better if I had her on wires actually being pulled up. It would have matched better with the perspective, but that's what we have to work with here. The downsides of doing it that way is obviously the perspective is not going to change if she's floating up. All I can do is just moving her up. It's not like the perspective on her is changing. The other downside is we can't see the other side of her left hand. Even if it was hanging down, we wouldn't be able to see that because it's blocked by the green screen. And also in the beginning, her hair is already floating down. Like, usually if she's like laying in bed, it would be flat. So something we have to work around, but that's what we have to work with here. First step is obviously keying out our footage. I'm going to be using Davinci today. Usually I made those tutorials in After Effects. If you want to see those, check out the link in the description. But today we're going to be working with Davinci. If you don't know how to use Davinci or you don't have it yet, just go download it because it is free, just like Blender. So go check it out. So once you have it in your timeline, the first thing I do is I cut it to the right moment where I want it actually to start, which is right here. I'm going to make a cut, delete this, bring it forward, and now I can check till when I want the shot to be going. Let's say here, trim it, and that's it. Now I need to mask her out. I'm going to be using Fusion for this. I'm going to click on my Fusion tab. Now that looks very different than After Effects, but this is a node-based compositor, so I need a few different nodes. First of all, I'm going to use the delta key. I'm going to plug in between. I'm going to have on the left screen, I have it, and also on the right screen, I'm going to have it too, so I see it on both screens. But on the left screen, I just want to see the alpha. Right now, there is no alpha. Everything is visible. That's why we have the green screen for. So I'm going to go under my delta key, drag and drop this picker, and pick some green, which is close to her, which I can see from the beginning that it kind of does most of the job, like here. Now here we can see it is rotoscoping our targets, our subject pretty well, but not perfectly. So I'm going to go on my mat and adjust the contrast, the threshold a little, until I only see black and white, or at least as good as possible. What I try to avoid is artifacts like this, so I have to work around that, especially with a key like this where, you know, there's lots of shadowy areas. This is not going to be easy to key, but let's just try to do our job as good as we can. And if it's not going to be perfect, which will probably not be, then we're going to fix or try to avoid it in Blender. I'm just going to play with the contrast until I feel like it is a good black and white mask. Clean the foreground a little. You can see here, if I clean up the foreground, it basically brings back my foreground a little. You don't want to go too extreme here, just enough to get a clean key. Under fringe, I usually do well done as spill method because that removes all the green spillage on her, because I don't want her to be green, obviously. Now it's time to make a garbage matte. I do that by picking this tool here, the polygon, and now I'm going to draw a rough mask around her where she's going to be. So I'm going to take the last frame to do that. Just draw it around her. It can be very rough, and close it in the end. Now it created a polygon node, but right now it's plugged into the blue channel. So I'm going to right click this, drag it to my delta keyer so you can see better. So I can put it into clean plate, garbage matte, solid matte, effect mask, but I want this to be a garbage matte. So now I just removed everything inside my mask. So I'm just gonna here under my settings, I'm gonna invert it, and it looks way better. Here I can see, okay, this one is not good, so I'm just gonna move this. But this is basically my mask now. Under the final output, I can see this is what it's gonna look like in the end. And there's a few more options you can go into, like blur the edges a little. You don't want to go too extreme here. You can erode it a little, go a little down to remove the edges just a tiny bit. But one more thing I did here, since she is moving like up, and I kind of want to, you know, bend her a little more, because Allie, she could only do so much. So I'm gonna use another node called the warp node. And again, if you want to create a new node, you hold Control and space on your keyboard. This is gonna make a new node. This is not the one I wanted. It's called Warper. So that's what we want. I'm gonna add it. With holding Shift, I'm gonna bring this in between the delta keyer and the media output. And now what I can do is I'm just gonna click on a few important places on her. It's basically like the pinpoint in After Effects, just a few. And now when I move them, let me actually have two here. So when I move them, I can basically rotate or move her body parts a little more individually. You don't want to go too extreme. Like here, I'm just going to go a little up, also a little up, the hand maybe a little down. But you can see when I adjust the hand, it also adjusts the thigh. So you have to be careful with that. But just a little adjustments. And now I can basically animate the warp scale. So I'm going to start on 0 on the very first frame, make a keyframe, go on the very last frame, bring it to 2. And now it's animated throughout just by a little bit, just to add a little more detail in her movement. Again, this is a tutorial, so I'm just rushing through that. You get the point what I'm doing here. If you have any questions so far, just let me know in the comments and I can get a little deeper into it, but that's basically what I did for this scene. So now when I go back to my actual editing layout, I can see what it actually looks like. Here I can see I have a few issues with the foot that's keying in and out. So to clean this up, I will basically play with the threshold a little more to avoid that. And another thing you can do is using a denoiser, noise reduction node. I'm going to plug this before everything. And here I can just have a little denoiser on everything that helps with the keyer usually. So that's something you can do. And anyways, since I shot this in S-Log, there is more professional ways to do that. But for most of my scenes, what I do is I just color grade it inside of Davinci or After Effects, whatever you're using, just to put a color grade on her, which is going to make it easier to, you know, blend it in the Blender color space. Now I'm ready to render this. I made myself a custom made preset just for my green screen scenes. When I click on it, you can see what I used here. So under format, I use QuickTime. Codec is GoPro Cineform. Type is RGB 16-bit. Resolution is 4K because that's how I shot it. Frame rate is how I shot it, 23.976, and export alpha. This is the important one. You definitely want to export alpha, otherwise you're just going to have a black background, and that's not what you want. You don't want any background. And once you're ready, you hit add to render queue and render. All right, let's get into Blender. I'm going to show you how you can integrate your green screen people. So let me show you my scene real quick. So this is basically my bedroom here. This is not my bedroom, it's a bedroom. There's only a few things I modeled here myself, which are those pillars here, which are just stretched out cubes. I made the window myself, I made the walls myself. This is just a glass. So it is very simple of what I made. The other objects like furniture, the painting on the wall, all of that I got from Blender Kit for free. So I designed my own little bedroom with Blender Kit objects. And obviously what I had to do is I animated everything from frame 1 to, let me actually turn off motion blur so you can see a little better when I scrub through. So I basically animated it that it's everything is just lifting up. I did that individually. There's also ways to do that with actual turning off gravity to make everything a rigid body, so it's actually floating up organically. But I just felt like for this particular scene, I just had more control if I animate all the different objects individually, so I can know exactly where they go. So in the end, like, my whole composition just looks nice in the way I want it. A few special things I did here. One thing I forgot to mention, I have a light here, a practical light. You can see it in the final scene, how it's like illuminating everything orange from left and blue from the right. So I have motivated lighting from the left, and when you look at my green screen scene, it's also the warm color coming from the same direction, which helps to integrate your green screen characters into your CG scenes. So that's how I lit her. Warm from the left and cold or blue from the right. Right now you can see I have a 3D model of a person floating here. This is just also a rigged model I had from Blender Kit. It's very cool because this one in particular, when I go to pose mode, I can pose her the way I want, and which is very cool. I can do with her whatever I want, which helps me to position my CG character, and that I'm going to use as a reference for height and position and form for my actual green screen scene. So I used that as a reference before I actually shot my green screen scene to make my life easier, so I know exactly the way I have to light her when I go into like cycles render view. Kind of have a better idea how she's lit. I can see like blue highlights here, warm light from the left, so that kind of helps me with that a little. So I'm just going to go back to my material preview, and now it's time to actually get my green screen character in here. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to shift right click on my 3D character here. That just brings the 3D cursor next to her. With Shift A, I can bring in an image and a mesh plane. So that's gonna open up this folder, and now I can import the green screen Allie I exported from Davinci directly in here. So here you can see she's lying flat, but she is too small when you compare this with my CG character. So I'm just gonna, with S, scale her up until I think she has more or less the right size. So I'm looking at the head, that the head is exactly the right size. Also GX, I'm going to bring her a little more into perspective, that she's exactly where my 3D character is. So the size should more or less match. Make it a little smaller. Okay, cool. Now I'm going to go to the very first frame. This is my timeline here. Now I can turn off my woman. I don't need her anymore. I'm gonna bring her with G, Z. I'm gonna bring her down, and she's laying flat on the bed right here. I need to rotate her a little. So with R, X, I'm gonna rotate her that she's actually lying flat. Great. Now I hit N so I can animate her. So I'm gonna hover over location, hit I, hover over rotation, hit I. So now I made keyframes for this exact position. Now I'm going to go to my last frame, and with G, Z, I'm going to bring her up to wherever I think it looks good. Let me check it through the actual camera. Also important is, make sure your 3D scene is as done as possible. You don't want like any confusion about positioning anymore, and the camera orientation, everything, and the lighting should be set before you do all that. So now I'm just going to bring her wherever I believe this would be the coolest spot for her to end, like right between these pillows maybe. And also I'm going to rotate her a little bit, let's say this way, so it looks like she's getting pulled up by her rib cage more or less. That's really up to me, whatever I want. Before you click away, make sure to hover over rotation again, hit I, hover over location, hit I. Now you made keyframes, and now you can adjust in your graph editor. You can adjust the curves a little. If you want her to start slower or end slower, something like that, you might want to adjust those curves. That's basically it for that. Now important is, go into your render view. We don't need this view anymore. Now we have to adjust her material a little. Let me zoom in a little, just to make her look like she actually belongs in there. I'm gonna go into my shader editor on this window so I can see the materials. This is what it comes with. It comes with a principled BSDF. My color is plugged into the base color, my alpha into the alpha, and the BSDF is plugged into the surface. Very often I don't even use a principled BSDF, but I feel like it's easier for most cases to leave the principled BSDF. If you don't want to, then you just use an emissive and a transparency node. Mix those together to actually achieve the same effect. But what I'm going to do with this is actually, I'm going to open my emission tab here, and I'm also going to plug in the color into emission and turn this up to 1. So now it's actually emissive, and I can see better what those colors actually do. So now I have to match this by environment. And the way I'm going to do that is I'm going to make another node. I usually start with the RGB curves node. RGB curves, plug this into between color and base color, but also you want to plug this into the emissive if you do it that way. So plug this into the emission color as well. So now when I adjust this, let's say I'm going to bring the highlights down, it's going to adjust my color. So my job now is trying to make this fit. So I feel like my scene here has more contrast than her. So I'm going to just bring down the shadows until I feel like, okay, that looks better with the shadows of my scene. I know this is completely black or like grayed out, like black. So I'm going to try to adjust the colors, the black spots of her, that it kind of looks like the gray here. So I'm going to play with that and zoom in here so I see better. I know that this chair is actually gray, her pants are gray, so that's a great reference. This is the kind of reference you will always want to look out for, because eyeballing that kind of stuff is very, very difficult. So the easiest way is if you have the same kind of material in your scene, just like in your green screen scene, so you can use that as reference. I'm just going to play with the curves until I feel like that looks better. And for the highlights, I have like skin color here as a highlight, or I can use maybe the gray shirt, try to match that with anything gray, bright gray here. This thing is white, so probably darker than this. Skin color wise, yeah, whatever could fit. And also I'm not looking at saturation right now. It might get too saturated when I increase the contrast too much. I'm mostly looking for the right brightness. That looks pretty good, but she's still too bright in general. Again, I'm rushing this process right now. Obviously, the more time you spend on it, the better it's going to get. But I just want to get through it real quick, because one more note, which is very helpful with stuff like that, is just before the RGB curves and after the actual video material, I add another node with Shift A, the hue and saturation node. I just plug it in between. And here, when I hold Shift, I can adjust the saturation a little. If it's too saturated or not saturated enough, I can adjust that with this node, just until I feel like that looks better. So that's basically it for that. Other things I did here, obviously, just to help my cheating a little, because obviously the camera wasn't like lifting with it, or she wasn't like lifting out of the shot. The lighting was the same, it was stationary basically. To simulate that, I have also my light here, which I also animated. I always kept it on eye level, so the light source always came from the same direction as a reference to her, just like in real life, because the camera wasn't moving, she wasn't moving, just to simulate that a little. That's one cheat I was using. Another little cheat I was using when she was lying down, because her hair wasn't flat, obviously, because there was no pillow underneath her. I just put like a CG blanket in front of her to cut off the visibility to the contact points. This is something I always try to do wherever your character touches the CG environment. I always try to block off the contact points somehow. So I did this with this little blanket here. And also, it's a cloth simulation. I turned off gravity, so it was actually flying up. And another little gimmick here, I had a glass of water, which I modeled myself. I know, very impressive. I'm so good at this. I basically had like a liquid simulation. You can barely see, but it's just like a little detail that while the glass is coming up, the liquid is flowing out of this. So the blue stuff you see here, this is basically a fluid simulation. That's what I did here. Anything other than that, I think that's pretty much. Oh yeah, my particles. I have puzzle pieces in the background flying up. You might wonder why puzzle pieces, because originally I was doing this shot for a horror film for the 48-hour film festival. That didn't end up using it, so I decided, okay, I'll make a little tutorial about that, how I made this scene. So I have puzzle pieces floating up. Those are a particle simulation. Nothing crazy here, just like a particle simulation. Because the gravity is turning off, those pieces just fly up. And I made some for the background, some for the foreground to have a little more depth in the shot. Yeah, that's basically it. Like lighting wise, I have this lamp here. And on the other side, for the rim light, I have one spotlight, blue light, coming straight from the other direction to match the lighting of my green screen character a little. Alright, that was a lot in a very short amount of time. I hope you get something out of it. If you have any questions at all, let me know in the comments below. That's what I'm making those videos for, so you can ask questions, I can answer them, I can teach you, you can teach me. Everybody here is getting wise and whatnot. Cool. That's it for this video. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video. Toodaloo.